Are you trying to establish your brand as a thought leader? Start a podcast, invite industry experts to be guests on your show, and watch your brand become the prime resource for decision makers in your industry. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Sean Blackburn with Sweetfish Media. Joined today by Matthew Biboud-Lubeck. He is the VP of Strategic Services at Amperity. Matthew, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that I think is going to be super important for our audience to get their feet wet with overall, the building blocks of data personalization. But before we jump into that, if you can just tell our listeners a little bit about you and your background and what it is that you guys do over at Amperity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent most of my career at consumer brands. Most recently was the head of data strategy for L'Oreal Group, helping them to create new personalized experiences across their 35 brand portfolio. And that time there really lent itself well to what we're doing here at Amperity, which I'll walk you through. But we're a CDP based in Seattle that's helping brands to create a single view of their customers and to unlock new personalized experiences from that data. So looking forward to unpacking kind of what we're doing and why that's different and some of my background and how I think the space has really evolved to make life a little bit easier for the marketer and for brands.
And I think it's an exciting topic, and it's a somewhat overwhelming one, like we were talking about before we started recording. But maybe start with, what is a CDP, and why does that matter here in the modern marketers' point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny if you look back to the founding of Amperity, so about 3 years ago, as our founders were canvassing the marketplace, what you saw was a marketplace using a lot of buzzwords, but having a lot of trouble executing them. And so you heard about personalization and customer 360 and 360 view of the customer. And marketers across major consumer brands were super frustrated. They'd spent a fortune trying to cobble together some view of their customer. They'd invested in technology to help them send better emails and to make their media more targeted and to unveil better analytics. And all of those tools that they'd invested in all talked about the notion of a single view of the customer because they fundamentally needed that to operate. But the reality was that no one was getting to the solution. So we came in to say maybe there's a better way. And sort of the two things that had changed in the marketplace that were super interesting that we capitalized on. First of all, was the fact that cloud computing got a lot cheaper. So it used to be that if you're a big brand and you've got hundreds of millions of customers across all of their interactions, it's just a lot of data. And so part of the reason that no one was able to put together an easy solution to putting that all together was because it was cost prohibitive and cloud computing got a lot cheaper. And the second really interesting evolution in the market that, again, you don't have to understand, but you have to understand that it changed dramatically is machine learning became much more mature and sort of moved out of sort of alpha test and learn space. And what we found was that everyone in marketing was using machine learning to make that last mile for the marketer a little bit better. So to decide which product to show a customer, or to decide which offer to show a customer, or to create a customer care solution that's automated. So you go online and you type for a solution, and sort of some bot talks back to you. Nobody was using machine learning to point at the underlying consumer data to help make sense of it and bring it together. And so we put together sort of cloud computing that was scalable, with better economics, alongside machine learning algorithms that we were pointing at the data to help make sense of it, and realized that what we had was a pretty scalable solution to help brands get to that nirvana of the single view of the customer. And that's how we were born. What's interesting is that the customer data platform space is a little bit confusing. And what you have is you have a lot of companies that started as something else. They were a tag management vendor, they were a personalization vendor, and they sort of rebranded as a CDP. We were purpose built from the ground up as a customer data platform designed to bring all of a brand's data, reconcile that data to create a notion of identity on it, and then to unleash that data back to the brand anywhere that they want to use that data.
I think that's amazing. And it's a fascinating world that you guys are playing in. Why do you feel, or maybe unpack the benefit for a marketer who's listening, having a single view of a customer, what are some of those overall benefits that you get from having that view versus a siloed one, or one that is, maybe just, not fully fleshed out in a picture?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of, let's build a pyramid here. So the first tier of the pyramid, and this is where all of the brands we work with see their first benefit, is the data is just accurate. So if you've created an experience for your best customers, you need to make sure that that experience is delivering to your best customers.
Right.
And so what we'll see is that a brand has created personalization for a certain consumer journey or experience, and the creative is great. The campaign management systems are the right ones, and they're all tuned to the right thing. But fundamentally, if the data underneath it is inaccurate, then the wrong consumers are being targeted, and so the brand isn't delivering the desired experience. An example of this would be, so think about the way that you've entered your data, across the sort of consumer brands landscape. Maybe you use different email addresses. Maybe you have different spellings of your name, or someone at a store typed your name wrong. And if you as a human being went to look at that data, you'd probably recognize that it was you across all of those different versions of your emails and your names and your spellings and your addresses. And historically, the way that this problem was getting solved was super crude. So you'd say, well, if the email address in system A and system B is a match, then that's an identity, and we'll put that together. And the problem is that it doesn't recognize the fact that Matthew Lubeck at gmail.com and Matthew Biboud-Lubeck at hotmail.com to the human eye is very likely the same person. But those crude algorithms couldn't catch it. And what that meant was that I was sitting as two different records inside of a brand's profile instead of a merged record. And what that means is that they saw me as two one-time buyers instead of as one top customer. And they probably thought I was lapsed and had stopped buying from the brand, which means that they were probably delivering to me an experience to try to reactivate me instead of recognizing me as one of their most valuable customers and delivering that experience to me. And so marketers are fundamentally and sort of at the last mile accountable for driving growth. And if they're doing all of this work to create amazing experiences and it goes to the wrong person, it's like they're burning cash.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And, there's kind of two challenges that I see from this, and would love to hear your thoughts on it between, the need to balance both. There's the need to aggregate all of this together and to actually have the, logistics in place to be collecting good data. And then there's, like you had mentioned, the last mile, the actionable part to really take this and actually use it. How is it that you feel like B2B marketers can really attack both sides of that coin?
Yeah, for sure. We talk a lot about this. And if you think about the brands we work with, they sort of fall across the spectrum of maturity in terms of their ability when they arrive to work with Amperity to play in sort of the data-driven marketing space. But they all have the same ambition, when they walk in the door. And what we see sort of in some cases is that some brands have put together the perfect data strategy. They've mapped out consumer journeys, exactly what they want to deliver. They've deployed an advanced analytics team to mine the data and build models. They take those models, they target them out to consumers with perfect content, but we don't always see that. And so the way that we kind of have structured our go-to-market is a software license approach where brand comes to Amperity and we'll say, you know what, you have everything mapped from the marketing last mile side, and what you need is better identity. So let's solve that for you. And then on the right side, we'll work with brands to assess where they are on their journey to customer centricity and say, you know what, let's of course deploy the software for you because you need this identity layer, but we'll layer on top of that added value services for them to help them on their journey. So that could be working with them to build a data strategy, figure out exactly what kinds of experiences they'd like to deliver and what that means in terms of the data that they need. And they either need to go gather it or we just need to get it into Amperity and get it back into a system for them. So it's funny because I think that the biggest disconnect that we see is a lot of people want to push this single view of the customer button, or they want to push the personalization button. But if marketers can sit down and spend a little more time thinking through the consumer experiences that they want to deliver that would be transformative, and then translating that to what data is needed and where that data is needed, they would have a really great blueprint for activating and transforming their business. And sometimes organizations are ready to do that, and sometimes they need a little bit of support. So we try to flex to make sure that everyone's tackling this to try to make real impact to their consumer experience, not just to build a better tech stack.
Right. And so Amperity is a different sort of platform overall. And we spoke about that before we started recording as well. And some of it centers around this idea of identity resolution. What does that mean, first of all? And why is that important? And how does Amperity really address that?
Yeah, I think that's great. So identity, this is super important to understand sort of identity before and after. So identity before, and you can see this playing out in really interesting ways right now with what happened with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. And there's a whole bunch of solutions for identity in the marketplace right now that are based off of the notion of a data graph. And what a data graph means essentially is that it's a shared pool of customers, and everyone that wants to use that data graph as a service is in some way pooling their data together. So you as a customer may go and you go online and you take a funny quiz that's like, what cat am I? Or you log into your Facebook profile and you do something with an action A. And what happens is your data goes through this derivative effect to make these data spines better and better. And then brands are able to go and tap into that to unify their customer data. That's been like the traditional approach to identity. The other approach to identity was this crude matching approach I described before of like email address A and email address B match. So let's just match them. Right. Which is a huge problem, again, because you end up with a whole lot of false negatives, and your data really doesn't come together. And so in one problem, you've got an incomplete solution. In the other problem, you kind of have a consumer transparency and ethics dilemma, which is, would customers be surprised with the ways in which their data is being essentially traded, downstream for all sorts of different monetization purposes?
Right.
Our approach to identity is pretty exciting because number one, we've made identity better. So our machine learning algorithms are looking inside of a consumer brand's data across all the places in their organization where their customer data lives. It requires no work on the brand to transform that data. Our machine algorithms are able to do that transformation. So we're what's called a no ETL solution. And what that means for a marketer is you don't need to go pay an army of people to go change the structure of the data, which means this project is less expensive, which means you have more money for your marketing initiatives. And we take all of that data, unify it. We're seeing significant improvement over some of the approaches from those data graphs that I described in the quality of identity resolution. And it's being done in a way that we think is pretty transparent to a consumer. So if a customer were to look inside of Amperity at what a brand that we work with knows about them, there should really be no surprises because it's what the customer gave that brand permission to use. And the brand is using it exclusively for the purposes of improving that brand experience. And there's no leakage of that data for other purposes with some hidden terms and conditions. That's actually pretty unique in the market today, believe it or not. And so we're pretty proud to be on what we think is the right side of identity, both because it's high quality, but because we also think that it's a new standard.
Absolutely. And, the customers who you guys have using, your platform at Amperity to do this sort of work, what are the sort of benefits that you have seen for them to be able to take this data that is just so overwhelming in some senses and really make it actionable?
Oh my gosh. So it's so exciting because every brand is using the data a little differently and they all have a different set of priorities when they arrive. So we work with major consumer brands like Starbucks, Alaska, Wynn Casino and Resorts, Gap. And you can imagine that as you look across a major airline to a major retailer, they all arrive with a different business challenge. Some of the most exciting ways we see brands deploying use cases from Amperity in the hospitality space, everyone's very focused on delivering a better consumer experience, but also driving revenue to improve yield. So if you're an airline, you want to book better seats and drive a better total customer lifetime value, but you're also super obsessed with the customer experience. And so there are use cases in the travel and hospitality space that are all around consumer recognition across the travel experience. And there were places like onboard an airplane or on parts of the hotel and casino experience where there were just gaps in where they were able to identify you, know it was you, and have the right data about you available to deliver that experience. And we've been able to help unlock some pretty exciting new travel experiences. In the retail side, there's sort of two flavors. Retailers have historically been sort of ahead of the game at trying to use marketing to drive to sale and conversion. And to optimize against that, we're doing a lot of work around predictive modeling by product category to take the data and then help them to build a better model to drive better response from consumers and identify the right people with the right marketing. And we're also spending a lot of time helping retailers to improve measurement. So believe it or not, if you don't have all of your data in one place where someone can interact with you across channels, it can be super difficult to optimize your advertising spend against real ROI because you couldn't see all of that spend. So we've been helping people to solve for measurement in a way that's been pretty transformative. Yeah.
I love that. And, Matthew, as a B2B marketer, if you were sitting in someone's shoes, a lot of what we've been talking about today is more on the consumer side, but this is, we all have consumers that are sitting in, businesses that are buying our products. How would you, suggest a B2B marketer be thinking through, this sort of issue of big data and making it, obviously aggregated and also actionable at the same time?
Yeah, I love this question because it's funny. We also have our own marketing team here, and we want to make sure we practice what we preach here at Amperity. And so if you think about a B2B marketer, it's not different, right? You have sort of the core. Maybe you have the data around your sales pipeline, right? And you're managing that inside of Salesforce. But then you're engaging with customers in all sorts of different forums. Maybe you're going to events and engaging in outreach through various community events and large conferences. Maybe you're hosting a large summit. You're probably have drip campaigns that are going out to customers. Well, do you know who's opening those and not? And is that data reconciled on top of your core Salesforce implementation if that's what you're using as your CRM? And so what we see in the B2B space is, it's funny, but it's not very different from ours, which is that everyone has that core place where they have enough of the data to be able to manage the day-to-day. And then very quickly, we'll start moving to Excel spreadsheets and other tools and email platforms for specific channel needs or specific event needs, and then they don't bring that data back together. And imagine how different it would be if you knew sort of by persona in your business how everyone was interacting with your content and your events and your outreach, and you could tailor your approach to try to accelerate your business initiatives with that data. So again, I would put the data together and make sure you have that. And I'd start, especially if you're an emergent B2B company, start now. It's a lot easier to solve for this from the beginning. And then that way you've got those pillars in place as you scale up.
I love it. Well, Matthew, this has been a great conversation, and this is a fascinating perspective that you brought to us on, the building blocks of data personalization. If anybody listening has any follow-up questions or would like to connect with you, what's the best way for someone to find you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, use the interweb. So I'm on LinkedIn. Email me at matthew@amperity.com. You can probably tell from this recording that I love to geek out about data. So if you like this, we could spend much more time together.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Matthew, for everything that you guys do over at Amperity. And thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.